Did you read the there was a funny article in the intellectual deep web about, sense making. Have you read that?
Yeah, I was talking to Owen about that actually, and my friend Owen Cox from the Technosocial podcast,
Right.
and he was saying that, Rebel Wisdom, they're always talking about sense making and play.
Right.
Like, why don't we just talk about religion and art,
Right.
Why do we need these neologisms? Why can't
Right.
we why don't we use get to the real thing, or philosophy, right?
Right.
Why are we using these sort of little neologisms to talk about society? What's the point in them? They're almost watered down versions of the real thing.
Exactly. Yeah, meaning crisis, sense making. I think it was about the meaning crisis, this article, no? And meaning.
Oh, that
crisis,
was funny. Yeah, that was funny.
Meaning crisis as a psyops, basically. I mean, it was like a satirical thing, but then I was like sitting here and thinking about it, and I was like, of course, it's like, of course, there's no meaning crisis. It's like, why would
there's always a meaning crisis. I mean, there's always
no. It's like systemically speaking. You can't have a meaning crisis. That's like a paradox.
Why?
No, well, in order to construct something like a meaning crisis or look at it, you have to have some meaning.
Oh yeah, sure. Because the meaning crisis is sort of means that people have no meaning.
Which is a meaning.
There's a lot of zombies, right?
Yeah, but people always have meaning. Crisis. People always have meaning. You don't have a void where there's no meaning, right?
Well, I think a lot of people sort of feel their lives are meaningless, and they're kind of just, as Bard calls, the consumariat. They're just plugged into something and they're consuming, and that's the zombie myth. That's the meaning crisis. I mean, I think there's always a meaning crisis. Like being a human being is a crisis on some level.
Well, yeah, no.
And also then there's the death of God, right? Then there's there's the Nietzsche's death of God. There's these times when society kind of is it falls apart, and people need to reconstruct and decide what the society needs to be.
No, I mean, I completely agree that meaning is changing. And narratives are changing and paradigms and stuff like that. But, it's like you can't have a meaning crisis in the sense of the word that, you even if you don't know how to further construct meaning, that's part of meaning making. That's part of sense making. That's part of, there's no void that you can't, that you can ponder without meaning. You know what I'm saying? You're always embedded in narrative.
You mean sort of like, even if you're the most nihilistic sort of person in the world, that's still, there's a thrust of meaning behind that, or something like that?
Yeah, because it's like being a nihilist is a paradigm and narrative and a certain perspective on view of the world. That's why nihilism doesn't work.
Yeah. But I know, I was thinking of art, and I was thinking of like the most nihilistic art is actually, it has this hope to it somehow. It has this meaning to it. It's like, even though it pretends to be really despise, the world.
Have you seen this art piece of this Swiss guy? He has like this thing, this invisible vase or something.
No.
So it's like a big thing in a Swiss museum, invisible vase. Something like that.
And there's nothing there.
No, of course not.
Okay. Yeah. So this is like, I was talking to Paggio about that. That's the meaning crisis, is there's nothing to say. It's like everything's already been said, and it's boring, and it's like, let's do contemporary, conceptual, boring contemporary conceptual art.
Right.
Instead of something of substance.
Yes, you are familiar with the quadrants of Wilber, no?
Yeah.
And so sure. It's like what I mean. What you're talking about is basically the lower left quadrant of meaning. Where where meaning making and sense making is kind of interrupted. But if you go into the other quadrant and just look from the system theoretically point of view, it's like you can't ponder the end of meaning because you're already doing meaning, constructing meaning. And that's why I think from that point of view, it's an absurd paradoxical term.
I don't think so, because I think as you declare that there's a meaning crisis, this means, okay, but
in that moment you already solved the meaning crisis.
You've already, you haven't solved it. You're on the road to a constructive attitude of meaning rather than a nihilistic one.
Yeah, but that's already the solution if you're already declared, because that's already meaning, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I don't have the problem with meaning crisis. I think there's a perennial meaning crisis.
No,
which means there's always a meaning crisis in yourself and in the society.
Right.
And there's a contemporary meaning crisis, which is related to whatever is going on, now, which is like, whatever is happening to us today and all these things we talk about.
Right. No, I was just referring to this article, where it's like it was a satirical view on the construction of the concept in order to keep nerdy minds preoccupied with something that isn't basically there. Wow. Right? That was the gist of the article. And at least as I understood it. And
oh, sure. Well, but it was an ironic, nihilistic type of article, right? So it's like, yeah, it was cool. It was like,
I don't know. I don't.
I think
I get there's a shift.
It was well placed. It was well. I agree with that, and these things should be really, really questioned. And there is a lot of neologisms floating around, and maybe we've had enough of the meaning crisis one for a while or something. But I still use it. I still cling to the idea of meaning. I'm not that much of a postmodernist.
Exactly. So, but the point is, I like to use the word out because it's the shorthand for a certain time of problem that you observe, certain. So, but again, it is in itself, like a lot of those words, it's an empty word, because you can't. Again, it's like you can't ponder the end of meaning because then you're already making meaning.
Sure, it's like a performative contradiction or something.
Exactly, in a way. Exactly. Well,
but I think that's just semantic. I think that what John Vervaeke in his series what he was trying to do is just point out the history of, let's say, nihilism,
right?
And how it's. But meaninglessness is a force as well, and there's a dialectic going on. So
right
between meaning,
the integral community is full of those words.
Of course, jargon. I have an anti-jargon, and actually, I used the word sense making in one of the videos that I made, and then I got rid of it. I realized I can't use that word anymore. Sense making. Oh, come on. Sense making. How about philosophy again?
Right.
Play. No. How about art? How about mature, serious stuff? Why all this hippie stuff? That isn't really grounded in. I mean, play is, of course, part of it's very, very important. It's. I think Panksepp calls it one of the main functions, and it's of course very important. But it gets a little bit cheesy, doesn't it?
So Robert Anton Wilson, he wrote like this great book about art, playfulness, and is it still art if it's not playful anymore? Basically, so he was like talking about these famous painters who copying like Picasso and Chagall and were selling these things, and so Robert Anton Wilson was asking, are they still artists? When they're just copying, and everybody thinks. These are great works of art, but they are like copies, like stylistic copies,
Oh, yeah. That's an interesting subject about imitation. We were talking about that in our discussion about the cool, which is coming out on Sweeny versus Bard very soon, the philosophy of cool. And there's a positive kind of imitation.
Right.
And then there's just a copying.
Yeah.
I think the positive kind of imitation is when you when you, let's say if you're Bob Dylan and you just absorb Woody Guthrie completely, like to the point of possession, so you're just copying him all the time.
Yeah.
You talk like him, you look like him, you know, and you're kind of a fake in the beginning, and then you find your own voice.
Right.
So there is a function of imitation, right?
Right.
And it's important, but it has to be it has to be destroyed as well. Cézanne was the same. Cézanne was a classical painter, and he copied all the he did all the classical stuff. Yeah. And at one point, he took all of his paintings and put them in a barn and set them on fire.
Right.
At that moment, he discovered, how to paint a mountain without perspective. Right. This not having a perspective and this sort of and color and a whole new kind of form of expression, which now looks very much like a cliche to us. So it, of course, has to be burned and destroyed as well.
Right.
But there is a process, right, of copying, which needs to take place.
I just recently saw, I two movies, like The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, right? And part 3 is it of The Conjuring. Super funny movie, horror movie. And the Ken Wilber biopic, Grace and Grit. Right?
Oh my goodness.
Have you seen that? That is hilarious.
It's hilarious, huh? Yeah.
Because it's bad, man. It's like, oh man. Because the guy, the filmmaker, he just basically, he copies Terrence Malick, with the flowing camera and this interconnectedness of scenes and the transcendent music. And then, but it's so cringeworthy because I really like Wilbur. I love the book.
Yeah, me too. I love the book. Like we're not disrespecting the book. It was a very sincere book about a real thing.
It's a proper Hollywood movie, Stuart Townsend and Mina Suvari, but it's so bad.
They made it Hollywood. Yeah, why would they do that? Yeah,
it's really bad.
I guess they want to publicize his work, or I guess it is a good story. I mean, it could be. It could be
on paper, it's a good story. Yes,
on paper, it's a good story, but yeah.
Yeah, first there was like this horrendous exposition problem. Do you know Ken Wilber? He's the Einstein of consciousness. Like for the millionth time. Yes, already. It's like it's not how you start a fucking movie, right? And then in the book they have like this very intricate exchange of letters, where they connect their personal life with the theory, and it's very interesting. So in the movie it's condensed in in like the most rudimentary like bullshit. It's so cringeworthy. It's he tries he tries to emulate Terrence Malick, this great poetic filmmaker. But it's just,
Well, the problem sounds like there's this fake sincerity, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that, right? Because I was talking to Alex Ebert, and he was talking about his music career, and he was a big star at one point, and he was doing punk rock. Yeah. He was doing this sort of ironic, sardonic, punk rock, and he did the whole sort of, I guess, cliche rock star thing where he became a heroin addict and. Because he had to manufacture some kind of crisis from his upper middle class, upbringing, so that he could, So he had a successful brand, a successful indie pop band, and then he was feeling kind of depressed and crappy, and it was like 2006, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to do sincere now. I'm going to do earnest."
Right.
So he just did this hippie thing with guitars and a big kind of traveling band, and he had like 15 people in his band, and they were all hippies. Right. And so I really enjoyed that part of his music because it was so not trying to be something. But he got the critics just destroyed that period of his career. He was panned in Spin and Rolling Stone and whatever, because they wouldn't let him change, and he wanted to change. He wanted to be something different, and so that's an interesting thing. Like he said, but he knew what he was doing. He was saying, "Okay, I'm going to be earnest and sincere,"
right? Which
is fake in a way to be earnest and sincere. So there's the self-consciousness about whatever being cool. You have to do the thing that is most impossible to do at that time, which was earnest and sincere. In 2006, no one was earnest and sincere, right?
Right.
This is what he was saying, and so he has this. So he really has this. He's looking back on his career and all these different changes he went through, and but anyway, I was connecting that to I guess I haven't seen Grace and Grit, the movie, but you know, how things get ruined is when people try to be earnest and sincere.
Yeah. Because what Terrence Malick was doing when he was like Tree of Life and doing this new kind of experimental Hollywood movies, I think it started with The Thin Red Line or something.
I love that shit. I mean, that's beautiful.
That he invented a new language, basically, a cinematic language, and it was authentically playful and earnest in a way to explore this kind of avenue of filmmaking. And that's where its authenticity came from, right? And so this filmmaker, he just copied that to, you know, the style to, you know, embellish his Wilbur movie with more gravitas, but it just comes out completely the wrong way, you know, because it's probably
should have done the opposite. He probably should have made it ironic and sardonic and kind of like minimalistic, and rather than put all this melodrama, you know, because, you know, Terrence what's his name again? Terrence Malick he's very melodramatic. He's poetic, and he's very big, right? And I think probably he should have gone small. He should have made something very simple about Wilbur, about very basic and very like unpretentious, and that would have worked.
Yeah, it's super pretentious because like you know his models, and it's super interesting, but because it's condensed in this kind of way, I just remember. So you have like these voices overlaying each other, like reading these letters, and it's like, oh, and the energies, and, you know, flowing, and it's absurd, you know, because Wilbur's philosophy comes from, you know, from the ground up and builds up, you know. It's like, it's super interesting to read that, you know, because it's down and dirty. It's like having sex on the floor, and, you know, it's like, and the joints hurt, and then you build up all these things, and what the movie transpires is like, oh, the energies, and ooh, and it's supposed to be meaningful.
It's woo-woo and sentimental.
Yeah, it's the worst kind of ice cream, you know, that not that one that smells good in your mouth, but that sticks in your fingers because it's, you know.
Yeah, in France, it's rose flavored ice cream. It tastes terrible. It tastes like cheap perfume or something in an ice cream. Yeah,
I feel that you can't really make an honest critique in the blogosphere about this without, you know, alienating a lot of people, you know, like, oh, this is a great movie. Like, no, like, when is the last movie you watched? It's like, we are so, movie making has so much developed in the last 20 years. You know, it's just copying Malick that doesn't cut it. You know?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, in the people who would want to support Wilbur and
exactly,
and, you know, it's hard to criticize a movie about a woman dying of cancer, you know, so everybody's going to be really nice about it. But, no, yeah, I had a feeling, I didn't see it, but I had a feeling it would be like that.
That's like one of those like B-movie Hallmark movies about Christianity, you know?
Yeah, it's funny, like, because I presumably their motive for doing that is promoting Wilbur's work, but making it more mainstream. There must be a motive behind that, but that's kind of cynical. That's unfortunate. It's like cynical earnestness or something.
Right. It's, you know, I don't know. There's this movement in Hollywood. You certainly heard of it. They want to make like new movies with James Dean and Marilyn Monroe. You know?
Oh, you mean they're going to make simulacrums of?
Yeah, because they have all the data, you know,
wow.
And they can spoon-fed the AI now to create new performances, and that is like that is super weird.
That's pretty weird. It's probably not going to work very well, but it might be an interesting kind of cultural moment.
Yeah.
Because you can't imitate a unique human being. It's too complex. I don't know.
But I don't know. I don't know how good the AI is now. You know?
Yeah, but again, it's like copying a Rembrandt or something. It's like you can't really do it. You can make it look pretty close to it, but a discerning eye will be able to know the difference between
no, yeah, but I think the technology is you have like a motion capture performance of a of a guy, and then you overlay it with all the imagery Hollywood has of James Dean, let's say, and so you have the performance of the real actor, but the expressions and the habitus and and gestures of the AI. I don't know. It's certainly an interesting, but it's like it's what is it called? I have a weird feeling about this.
Yeah,
because it's not original.
Yeah, it's very postmodern, isn't it? It's like
right.
Okay, it's like mass produce something, and like Duchamp's toilets, or the Mona Lisa with a mustache on it. It's we know it's fake, and well, we'll see. I don't know, because I don't know how far can AI go in manipulating our perceptions. It's a good question.
I mean, the question of art and novelty, and the moment when you're getting accepted for that novelty, and then basically you're repeating yourself, but that sometimes just enhances your success. You know what I mean? That is like also like a very weird process. I'm thinking about the grunge movement, and all the people who were developing this new kind of musical style, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly they get famous and get boxed into this kind of musical style, but then their style is like kind of fixed, and they're producing like say Pearl Jam or Soundgarden, all these great albums, but they're basically like repeating themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
that was what that was what Alex Ebert was trying to figure out, how to not do that, right? How to not be stuck in that audience capture, and corporate capture, right? When something becomes just commodified, grunge becomes commodified,
right?
Then cool becomes commodified, and then it's no longer really cool anymore, and you have to find something else.
Yeah,
because you have to always be on the edge, or you just become a cliche. You become you just are acting. I like what Johnny Rotten
sure.
in the Sex Pistols. They did a reunion concert, and he said it was like a Civil War reenactment. Because it wasn't the real thing. He's like, this is not the real thing. He was quite aware of it. You can't capture that moment,
right?
But it's like a Civil War reenactment. It's like you're repeating something. It's like historical, but it's not.
Right.
It's not actually happening anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, but on the other side, and that's why I'm mentioning this, that I was listening. I love Pearl Jam. I was listening, to this whole playlist recently, and it spans over 15, maybe 20 years of music, and the sheer amount of great songs, that they put out, it's just astonishing. And then I was asking myself, so what does make a song great if you're an already established band? Like, is it because like people expect a certain style of you, or because evolutionary speaking they are producing something that society needs and craves, and because it's like the DNA is already there from the first album, right? Yeah. And they repeating that kind of DNA.
Well, I guess if you're a fan, and I was never a big fan of Pearl Jam, you love everything the artist does, like if you really get into it, right? Because I know guys that go to, like my uncle who's an ambulance driver in Toronto, he goes to every program. He buys tickets to go to see Pearl Jam. It's like,
of course,
which I find very strange, but that's because he loves the group.
Right.
So they have some good albums and some bad albums, and but you create a kind of community around the group, and it's like a secret language for guys who like Pearl Jam. And I don't really know this language. I only know their hit song, and
No, but I mean, like, it's like it doesn't matter if it's Pearl Jam or Nirvana.
But I'm sure they probably do very good music, but it doesn't. It's no longer the music of the cultural moment.
Right.
It's music for the tribe or something.
Right. That makes
tribe
sense.
Of people who who are fans of their music. Whereas that's different than in the past, where the Beatles were sort of for everybody, right? Or the Stones, or these big bands in the 60s and 70s.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. They put out an album and you'd love it or hate it, and it was like for the entire culture.
Yeah.
At least the Anglo's culture, but and often, all over the world.
I mean, it's so. I mean, we're just rambling from and going from one topic to another. But it's like three years ago, I was going to a concert of Eddie Vedder here in mm-hmm. Barcelona, right?
Yeah.
And that was a quasi-religious experience.
Sure.
Because it was like a very basically tiny stadium, and just him with the ukulele, and 20,000 people just around him. And that was just him and the ukulele, basically.
Yeah.
And that was like, and at the end, the people were crying, right?
Sure.
And it was something, to be able to, create this momentum, this, this, church-going moment where you elevate the experience of everybody.
Yeah, if it's just one guy with the guitar, it's like, okay, he has this big band and there's a big concerts, and then he comes and he's like intimate, alone, and it's like you're alone with him in a huge crowd, and there's this vulnerability and
exactly,
and it's that I experienced that when I saw Bruce Springsteen in the 90s play with just like an acoustic guitar. It was so powerful. I never liked his rock and roll very much, but I liked his very quiet, intimate songs, which are very powerful. But anyway,
but what is that comes to fruition here? What is it that makes Terrence Malick, or like Pearl Jam, or Eddie Vedder, or Bruce Springsteen? What, like, this thing that comes out? That thing from which Miles Davis said, why is it so complicated to sound like myself? It's like, what is it that emerges? It's like, and what adds to the cultural, momentum or discourse or whatever? It's like,
there's an element of mysteriousness behind that. What is it? Like, nobody could play the trumpet like Miles Davis. I mean, nobody can, even though there's legions of imitators. There's only one Miles Davis.
Yeah, there's only one Terrence Malick.
Yeah, there's only so you can't copy. It has to. You have to have come upon, I guess, something that hasn't been explored yet. You have to be in touch with some new territory.
Yeah, that what was that came to light, in the beginning of the 90s with grunge. When it was a cultural moment. In the 60s, when there was a cultural moment with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
Like, these things that emerge and that capture, our imagination. It's just that add something to our mimetic landscape, so to speak.
It's like add a new language or something like that. In the Beatles, it would be this kind of fun melodic thing, and then I guess the grunge would be this like primal scream that the culture needed at that time because it was so dark and
right.
It's almost like it's an expression of what is needed in the culture somehow. Art used to be like that. I don't know if it is like that anymore because maybe it is. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to capture. We don't have broadcast media anymore, so we don't have one group that can capture the entire world. We have these subcultures everywhere.
But isn't to span a wider net here? Isn't that the argument of, and end of civilization and end of what is the end of history, that all basically those great forms have been invented, and that what comes now with postmodernism, it's like just a reiteration and a recombination of that was what was before.
No, I think that's a cynical view. I think there's always creative spirit alive and everywhere. It's just how it expresses itself changes, like, and in what mediums and modes, right? You know, as Marshall McLuhan says, the medium changes everything. So it's the way that people receive this information that's changing, you know, and it's changing our mind. But there's still a equal amount of creativity pouring itself, an equal amount of Shakti, if I could be cheesy religious,
right?
Pouring the creative spirit is pouring through. You know, it's always pouring through people.
So, what is the newest thing, the newest emergence in terms of artistic expression that you have witnessed?
I don't know, because in terms of music, I don't listen to a lot of pop music anymore, so I'm not really. I'm kind of out of it in the contemporary art world. So maybe you have more, maybe you're more keyed in than me. I wouldn't know really. I think it's interesting. Podcasts are sort of this creative thing that emerged, and long form YouTube stuff. And what we're doing now is kind of creative in an intellectual sort of way, or in the art world, I'm not sure if I know what's going on.
Right.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what movements are happening. There must be movements.
I mean, like when I look at, you know, the pandemic, there were like two cultural moments that happened basically, and that has something to do with what you just said. The medium is the message, that there was a new fusion with that Zoom. Internet technology and a new way of presenting music, and so
people presenting music in their homes, right?
Yeah, and so there was like the first thing that was like a huge moment. That was, I think, in June last year. That was, you know, the new album of Run the Jewels. That, you know, Run the Jewels 4. That's and they made like this huge internet concert, and that was a big thing, because the album is great, and the presentation, that was not just a concert streamed, that was like made for people at home, you know, like Netflix style, a live concert via YouTube. That was amazing, the production value, and there's hip hop, and the hip hop album, and, you know, just like the last song, a few words for the firing squad. The last song is just, just bass. You know, there's not even drum. There's just bass, or like, and they're just, you know, it's just a great.
Yeah, see, it's still going on then. In these big movements, they're just.
And so the second one that was this year, that was NOGA EREZ from Israel. She did the same thing, but with a completely new style of rap music from Israel. It's like, and she did this, you know, huge presentation, live streaming it, the first concert, the release concert on YouTube. That was amazing. You know, it was, you know, these were two artists or two groups at least, where I think that's like pointing the way, where like the new medium merged with a new kind of music and a new style, and you know, that was fantastic.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking about that, because, you know, we're online, right?
Right.
All the time. So it makes sense that the art would move online, and there would be online concerts and that kind of thing.
Right.
And you can get a powerful experience from that. Not as powerful as you say, the Pearl Jam concert with all the sweaty people and you know. So that we have to keep both. It's like we have to. And the two have to maybe be in dialectic with each other, or just be in conversation with each other. It's like, okay, we do these things, and just like what we're doing now is at Parallax, is we're doing online stuff, but we also want to make real life events with real people.
Right.
We need to do both.
Right.
But we're learning the online languages of how to do this. It's very awkward, and And
I mean, it's always shitty to be so self-congratulatory, but I mean, man, we're doing great with, we're pushing the boundaries of what's going on in podcasting. And
sure.
I mean, I'm just joking, but it's
No. I mean, we always have to push the boundaries. Otherwise, we'll just get bored, right? We'll just become this repetitive thing. And I think it's also, we're probably both us are constitutionally incapable of becoming a, that kind of act, that kind of,
yeah, but it's like it's also about finding a niche, and there's like, there's it's so interesting, for podcasters or what we're doing, or like if you're a new group and just looking for that niche and finding them, look at the old, the old 89 videos of Pearl Jam, when they're just like playing in the mall and Eddie Vedder already had his shtick, it's like, he's like this convulsory, like, it's like, and so, but he was already there, but the culture wasn't ready yet to embrace him fully, and there's an attractiveness to that, looking for that niche, basically. But then he found it, and it's like, and what we're doing is trying to find a cultural niche with Parallax.
And it's interesting. Like there's an awkwardness, right, to Eddie Vedder in those days, which means that he's asymmetrical. It's what Alex Ebert was saying. It's that cool is always a little bit asymmetrical to the culture, right? It's like
right. That's interesting.
It's a little bit off. It's a little bit off. It's a little bit wrong. It's a little bit, it's cool, but it's also geeky at the same time. It's
okay. Like, so now there you have a performative contradiction, because you if that is true, so then I mean, like Jim Morrison, he was asymmetrical in the way that he was performing his first concerts like with the back to the audience, right? Yeah. And so, but if he
was always kind of fully
cool, but
but not probably when he was a military boy or whatever, he wasn't that cool, but as soon as he got on,
but can it still be cool if you're reproducing asymmetry? That's the fucking question. If that's the thing that you have to do in order to be cool, because it's like you know what I mean?
Oh, well then, the asymmetry might be the symmetry at one point. Again, this is a contradiction, but you could be cool by always finding the cutting edge thing and doing something different, or you could be cool by just sticking to one thing and doing the same thing. Like you could just wear, Alexander was saying, wear the same black dress every night, and somebody's expecting you to change and you never change. That could be cool,
right?
So cool doesn't mean you always have to and also probably if you're trying too hard to be asymmetrical, then you're not being asymmetrical.
Then you're not
You're
cool.
Just being cynical. You're not really cool. You're cynically imitating cool, and it doesn't really work. It's not really authentic. It doesn't. So cool is you always have to be in this unknown, I think. Or this,
but that's what
you always have to be in this sort of liminal space.
Right.
You can't. As soon as it becomes crystallized as cool, it's no longer cool.
Exactly. And so the point is that I was trying to make it in the forum is, you basically what happens is you have to break the rules of what is, societal be accepted. And, you don't have to give a fuck about that. Hence, you're cool about it. But you don't have to ponder that. Other people have to, give this attribute to you that you are cool. You can't emulate this for yourself. You can't produce coolness for yourself, because in that moment you're uncool.
You're uncool when you're overly self-conscious about something, and people can feel that.
And so it's like you can't really produce asymmetry, because it's like what I want to say is it has to be in a way a bit unconscious that you do that. It can't be an attitude.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bit unconscious. Because you're in the liminal space, you're taking things from the unconscious.
Right.
You're dealing with powers and forces that are beyond you. They're not you. They're not something you can construct. You can't construct cool.
Right.
It's like Miles Davis when he's playing his trumpet. He's not constructing this unusual sound that he makes. It comes from somewhere. It comes from the unconscious, as you say.
Yeah.
I think that's right. And I think as soon as it becomes self-aware and overly self-aware. It loses that ambivalence and that ambiguity and that, that quality, that strange quality that makes it something, appealing. There's part of the void, right? Also in Cool, there's part of nothingness in it. There's kind of like an absence in it.
It's so interesting because if you look at the Beatles, it's like Paul McCartney never was really cool.
No.
But, John Lennon was always cool as fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So because he was so driven and he was such a complicated person, such an asshole at times, but always like in that liminal space where he was like channeling, the forces of culture and collective consciousness and, not only music wise, but politically. And he was, that was, but
in retrospect, I wonder who was the greater artist. I wonder if it was actually Paul McCartney on some level, just because of the sophistication of his melodies, and he wasn't cool, but he might have been a greater artist in the end. I'm not sure.
No, I think this is without question that he was the better artist.
He was the better artist, yeah.
But he was, but Lennon was the greater shaman.
Right. Yeah. Lennon was a greater shaman, and because Lennon was sort of tragic in some sense,
Yeah, and he was like, and so that is the point maybe of this discussion. So about novelty and liminal space and meaning making, and I always try to find a common theme, But Lennon, he was with the Beatles, then he did the Plastic Ono Band, and then he had like a 4 or 5 year period when he wasn't doing nothing and just raising his kid, Sean. And then by 1979, he was starting to do music again because he was so offended by the crap that Paul McCartney put out at that moment. And so he was thinking, and deliberately, so there are interviews about it, that he was thinking about designing the sound of the 80s. He was trying to, and then he put out Double Fantasy, he got killed, and he designed the sound of the 80s. And so he was like going into the future, putting, like bringing all that he knew into a projection of what the sound of the 80s have to be.
So and the shaman is he looks beyond the horizon on some level. He can get information from the future.
Yeah, but he was so self-aware by that point that he was able to do that. And he was like, and looking back from that point, he always did that. He did this with the political movements, with the Black Panthers, with the immigration stuff, with the drugs, bigger than Jesus, whatever. But he was like, he was the proper shaman. He wasn't that good musically wise, but
he was always on the edge.
Yeah. And so then there was no avenue left to explore, and then he was killed because that was the only way, magically speaking, that his vision come to fruition in a kind of way. It's super interesting that he was living this archetype, and in order to in a certain way he had to be killed.
Yeah,
to be frozen.
I mean, that's in retrospect. You can say that in retrospect.
Yeah, of course. But
look at the pattern. And that's the pattern that he was a sort of shamanistic, messianic,
right?
A Jesus.
He had to be frozen in time.
Yeah, I guess maybe. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
But he was a producer of forms, Mm-hmm. And that is so interesting to me. He wasn't that good.
Yeah. I was never as big a Beatle fan as you are, but I since I have a 11-year-old daughter, we bought this Beatles songbook,
right?
And I'm going through the songs and playing them with her, on the guitar, and wow, they're much more sophisticated than you would think, and they're way more sophisticated than the music that people put out these days because they're melodically rich. They have a lot of chords in them, and they're right. I was really surprised about that actually, because my style has always been kind of like Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, and they're much simpler, more simpletons in terms of music than the Beatles, which I was very surprised about that actually.
Right.
even though they have a deeper quality, they don't have as big a musical palette,
right,
as the Beatles do. So
there's a group from the Netherlands. They're called the Analogs. I don't know if you know them, and they specialize on making live performances of the Beatles albums. And so there's like a 2-hour live video, continuous concert of the White Album.
Sure.
And it's like, because you only know, the album, but if you listen to that, and it's perfection. It's like at the end you're just crying, because the whole thing is so organic and so beautiful and so varied. And it's like so many different styles coming together and creating this masterpiece. It's like one of the most beautiful concerts there is out there, because it's like it's how the White Album is supposed to be listened to. It's like in a continuous live presentation. It's fantastic. And then you see all this nuance and this genius behind all these silly and songs.
But on the other hand, there was often very off-the-cuff things that they were doing. They were just playing around like children in a sandbox, just throwing something on and this, here, that. It wasn't an intentionally created masterpiece. It was like very unintentional in a way. It was
exactly, yeah. But they're always creating this new forms without giving a fuck.
Yeah,
you know, and so
that's. And also the interesting thing about the Beatles too is that they were a group, because I don't find the music of Lennon and McCartney and even Harrison all that convincing after the Beatles. I don't like the anthemic Marxism of John Lennon. I don't like the song Imagine.
Right.
I like the Yoko Ono band, because it was sort of this powerful kind of like very emotional album. And then after that was like a death album. And then after that, I just, the music is boring to me. There's nice melodies sometimes, and the words are very simple, and there's Paul McCartney, whatever he puts out is clever, super clever, and he's obviously the cleverest melodic person around. But all these guys don't really exist outside of and then Harrison had his moment with
All Things Must Pass, yeah.
This kind of All Things Must Pass, and this kind of Hindu spirituality, but they're not convincing on their own. They don't almost exist on their own fully, I think. Maybe if John Lennon was trying to create the sound of the 80s, but he still wasn't that good on his own.
No. And so it's like but this is like, the consensus of the critics, that they're like frozen in time, like Jim Morrison is frozen in time. He will for all eternity, Jim Morrison will be 27. He will always be that God, and the Beatles will always be also like 29, 28 when they separated as a group.
I guess that's the cost of being a God is you have to sacrifice something to be a God,
I think so, yes. Sadly, that we don't know what we have to sacrifice.
Right. It's very tragic.
And it's also it's not a conscious process, because you're thrown into this if it's supposed to happen to you,
Yeah, right. You look in retrospect and you see the pattern, but while it's happening, nobody has any idea what's really going on.
So that was a very elaborate podcast about why Grace and Grit is a fucking shitty movie.
Yes.
Sorry, yes. Ken. I'm so sorry.
We're sorry, you. Ken. We love you, Ken.
I love you.
The movie, no, sorry, no, doesn't work. It's not art. It's Hollywood